I'm Rebecca Onion, and I have a PhD in American Studies from UT that I defended my dissertation in 2012, and I'm a senior editor at the website slate.com. I ended up, I guess technically my first job after grad school was a postdoc. I had a postdoc at an organization in Philadelphia that at that time was called the Philadelphia Area Center for the History of Science. They've changed their name since. But as I was working there, it was a great postdoc. They sort of just, let me have space and time to write. The idea was, try to write a book proposal for my, dissertation book and try to, continue being academically active. Both of which things I did. At the same time, I started blogging for Slate. I knew people who worked there. I had freelanced there a little bit. And they independently came up with the idea that they wanted to have a history blog, a documents-based blog. And they knew that I was, interested in cultural history and had like a diverse range of sort of areas of interest within cultural history. And so they asked me to write a memo, which I can go into a little bit more if it's interesting, but basically it's just a long proposal for what you would do with a given project. And which I did, was a couple sample posts and a bunch of ideas about what posts I would do. And I got the gig, but this was just a half-time gig. So it was like, I was posting every day. It's just a mailman here. I was posting every day, but I was not, I was not paid, it wasn't like a benefits job. It was a freelance, like a permalancer job, basically, there. And that went on for a couple of years while I was also sort of working out my relationship to academia, which was affected by a bunch of other factors, including the fact that my husband, who I met while in grad school, decided not to pursue an academic career and had a specific job in a specific place. So started to look like being like going back into media and working remotely would be more flexible for me. Again, going back to the sort of lack of a range of jobs for humanities PhDs, there were some jobs that, I applied for and some that I liked and wanted, but most of them were not in places that we felt like we could move or wanted to move. So long story short, I sort of convinced Slate to take me on as a staff writer in 2016. So I guess that's technically my first job after grad school, because that was the first time I had like a full-time, benefits position with them in 2016. And between 2012 and 2016, I was blogging and writing for them, but also freelance writing for a lot of other publications, kind of building my portfolio, doing some more like content writing, like less byline stuff and some byline stuff, like a mix of those things. And also writing my book that came out of my dissertation project. And then in 2016, I went on full-time at Slate, and then just recently, I was promoted to senior editor. I'm not sure necessarily advice would be the way to put it. What I got out of grad school it helps me like every day, all the time, in every way, is the ability to read, synthesize, and report on information, especially during the sort of the coursework and the qualifying exam phases of the program. There was such a heavy volume of reading. There was a level of trying to understand, we're constantly trying to understand what previous scholars had said about something and report on it and summarize it and like make our own argument with it, which is a lot, with the addition of trying to apply some of that stuff to what's going on in the news, basically like correlating opinions and research and trying to synthesize it and summarize it effectively and accurately is like a lot of the job. And so that was basically sort of the boot camp of American Studies grad school, is just like doing that all of the time. And I've found that to be like a lifelong skill in a way. I remember one specific assignment which helps me if I think about it. There in our first year American Studies Methods seminar, we had a professor, Mark Smith, in the American Studies program, who had us do an assignment where you pick a primary source. And I picked a young adult novel called Julie of the Wolves, which people may know, by Jean Craighead George, and basically try to do research on the primary source such that you you kind of are going out in concentric circles from the source itself. So writing about like the historical context into which it was produced, writing about the people's reactions to it at the time, and then writing about what has been written about it, the secondary sourcing, and just trying to understand like basically the effect of the source in the world as like completely as you can. And that is something that I think about all the time when I'm trying to do kind of like more explanatory journalism. And I think that was a really good assignment. So it's a little different now because I'm editing, but it's somewhat similar to what I was doing when I was writing. I have always am sort of responsible for like a number of ongoing pieces. I typically put up, I've actually been counting it. I'm sort of responsible for between 20 and 30 like pieces of content on the website per month. And so that's both stuff that I write and then stuff that I'm editing. And so on any given day, there's pieces that are in a number of like states of doneness, basically. So in the beginning of the day, I'm trying to get better all the time at having systems for it. But in the beginning of the day, I basically take stock of like which pieces are gonna have to move into which phases that day. So whether it's a piece that I'm writing or a piece that I'm editing, I'm like, okay, well, where is the draft? Does the writer know that, edits are gonna come in at this time? Do I need to edit it? When is it gonna go up? And then from that, I can kind of prioritize what I need to do that day. So then I'm sort of like toggling back and forth between the different pieces. Like as an editor, there's a lot of correspondence, a lot of emailing, a lot more than there was as a writer. I was kind of shocked to find out. And so I'm usually basically sort of diving into a piece, writing out edits on it or writing it. And that's like the more sort of like long-term, like long attention span stuff. And I find that it's worked well to kind of intersperse that. Like if I have 45 minutes and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna crash on this piece for 45 minutes. And then I'm gonna turn to try to clean out my inbox a little bit and like write some emails. And then of course there's meetings. So every day we have a 2 p.m. editorial meeting where all the editors get together and talk about what's going to happen for coverage that day. And then sometimes we'll talk about a specific news story and basically brainstorm what we think we might do effectively to cover that story. So that 2 p.m. meeting sort of like splits the day into half. And I end up in the afternoon, I sort of end up having a little bit less concentration skills. So sometimes I try to make the afternoon be a time when maybe if there's a book I need to read, maybe that's when I'll do it. Or if there's a phone call to make where I'm talking to a writer about something, maybe I'll schedule it for then. I've sort of rediscovered that phone calls can be a really efficient way to make work happen since I started editing. But that's more of so I'll try to make that more of an afternoon plan, and the morning can be like more of a time when I'm really concentrating on getting into a piece. And then if there's a big news event, like what happened last week with the draft opinion getting leaked from the Supreme Court, everything is different and everyone is like trying to crash on figuring out what to do. And I might be called in to do different kinds of, it disrupts your schedule a little bit because you're just like trying to get things finished. The main sort of thing would be sensibility. There's sort of the basic skills of like, hopefully the person is, able to produce writing on a prose level, like you can see in cover letters and memos and all of like the materials that a person submits, whether or not they independently without an editor can produce what we call like clean prose. So like just stuff that doesn't really need that much attention, with good transitions between paragraphs and, a paragraph up top that sets the stakes of the piece, and all of the sort of like flags to the reader that like reassure the reader that you're like confident and in control of how this argument is going. That's sort of like on a prose level, but there's also something at Slate where, because it's a place where people are really given a lot of scope to write, which can be like really good for some people and really hard for others, but there's a lot of freedom to produce your own agenda. So the person would have to be really familiar with what kinds of things are talked about in whatever area they're like, say they're like a tech writer or someone who wants to cover religion or someone who wants to write about parenting. They would have to display like a deep familiarity with the conversations that are currently going on in the area, but also an ability to sort of like pitch ideas that are a little bit sideways from the conversation, like that shed new light or like are surprising in some way. Because we're trying to really provide writing that takes like a discourse and makes it new, like makes people like helps people look at it in a different way. And so when someone is applying for a job, like at a place like Slate, they would provide like a list of ideas. So from the ideas, you can see like, do they have a handle on what's currently been already written, and do they have a fresh perspective on it? So that's more of a sensibility thing, I think, than a skills thing. And then of course there's all the boring stuff like, do they file on time and are they responsible? Like, the kind of stuff that any employee hopefully would provide. I think that people who are interested in journalism, and especially online journalism, are both cursed and blessed with Twitter. So when I first started wanting to get back into freelancing and wanting to get back into writing more seriously, sort of at the end of my experience in academia, I joined Twitter in 2010, and it's just amazing. Like that's like where journalists talk about stuff, especially people who write for online publications. And occasionally there is sort of some sort of trend where people are like, journalists shouldn't be on Twitter as much or whatever. And it never seems to go anywhere. Everyone just goes back and participates. So if a person is in grad school and is trying to figure out whether journalism is for them or like online writing is for them, you truly can get a lot out of figuring out who in the publications that you're interested in is on Twitter and following them, and just kind of like eavesdropping on what they're talking about. Like you can look and see, they might share pieces that they really think are good, or like pick apart pieces they think are bad, which is like a horrible habit that people on Twitter engage in. But it also, for a young person or a person who's thinking of transitioning into that world, it can be, I think, helpful. There's a lot of discussions about ethics, discussions about sourcing, also pitch calls, like calls for ideas to be submitted, so that if you want to start actively participating, you might actually see someone say, I'm looking for a writer to cover this. They're on Twitter, there are a number of organizations that like aggregate those pitch calls and sort of like professional material. So I really like the organization that's called Study Hall, that's in New York, that is a group of freelancers. I believe they're now like officially a nonprofit. And they have a newsletter and a Slack and a number of email lists for people who are freelancers. And it's you have to pay a small amount every month, I think, to get certain newsletters. But I pay it because there are opportunities newsletter, which is just an aggregation of pitch calls and job ads. Plus also they add some more sort of like discussions of current trends in freelancing or current trends in journalism hiring that are like, written by, they have staff writers basically that sort of write about that. And it's really valuable and interesting. And I get to creep on there and see what my fellow editors are commissioning. I think about it. And there's a number of other organizations that are sort of like that. There's a Twitter account called @Writers of Color that is like specifically geared towards writers of color. And they share a lot of opportunities in that same way. And then there's like just a million people of varying degrees of credibility who have made it like a little bit of a business to give advice to freelancers. There's a guy named Tim Herrera who I believe he quit his job at the New York Times, but used to work at the New York Times, who does a lot of seminars for aspiring freelancers, and he will sometimes make them free in various ways and sometimes charge. But he also has a newsletter. Since it's the age of Substack, there's a lot of newsletters for freelancers that share opportunities. And his is one of them. So I think, there's like the sort of like the older school, more traditional journalism associations. But I think for someone who wants to get into writing on the internet, the best way is to see what the people who are writing on the internet are doing. And a lot of times those streams of information are a little bit newer and more ad hoc than the older organizations. But also, the advantage is they're available to anyone in any place, and you can be remote and look at them, and you can get I think a pretty good sense of whether you're suited to it.